Hello and welcome to our motor control and skills training program on the basketball free throw. Here's an example of how the basketball free throw is performed. The basketball free throw is one of the most useful skills and components of the basketball game. It is performed when a player is fouled and they perform a shot at the free throw line with no defense. For our assignment, we will be putting our learner, who is a novice, through a 4-week training program. And now I'm going to break down and classify the skill, point out some key points, demonstrate how we measure it, and then go through the stages of learning and some retention and transfer tests.
Golden State leads.
To classify the skill, there are two perspectives. One-dimensional involves systems on a continuum. Looking at size of the musculature, the basketball free throw is classified as a gross skill. Distinctiveness of the movement classify the skill as discrete because it's distinct beginning and end points, and closed because the environment is stable and does not change from one trial to the next. In Gentile's two-dimensional taxonomy, the basketball free throw is classified as 1B, and its regulatory conditions are in motion, such as basketball. Body manipulation is stable in performing the free throw, and it can change from one trial to the next because we change sides during the game. Okay, so now I will go over the key aspects of the basketball free throw. 1. Have your feet pointing towards the ring. This allows your body to be in line with the target. Then have your knees flexed and shoulder width apart with a slight bend at the hip to allow you to transfer momentum as you come up and release the basketball. You want the ball centered in the middle of your hand and on your fingertips to allow for total control of the basketball. You want to have your arm in an L shape and pointing towards the target, and to snap your wrist in the follow through to make sure you're releasing the ball correctly. And lastly, finish on your toes. This allows you to make sure that all your momentum is acting upwards and forwards towards the ring so you're not falling backwards or to the side. We will measure performance qualitatively through observation on the key aspects during 10 free throw attempts. We will rank the participant on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, and give a grade both pre, post, retention and transfer. Also during the test, we will measure performance quantitatively by seeing how many successful free throw shots they make out of 10 and giving them a grade. We use both measuring types to make sure the free throw is accurately assessed and to give a rough guide of where the learner is, and then we can assess the level of improvement once the program is over. Here, I will go over the stages of learning and the predicted outcomes. After our 4-week training program, it is predicted that the learner will move through the cognitive stage from weeks 1 to 2, which is where the learner is making large number of errors and exploring the skill, to the associative stage through weeks 3 and 4, where the skill starts to become more refined and more autonomic, but may not reach the autonomous stage, where the skill becomes increasingly consistent with little errors. We can't measure learning, we can only infer it from performance. So to do this, we use 2 tests. The first test is a retention test. It's used to see what is retained after a period of non-training. We did this by replicating the pre-test conditions and compared the results. To measure adaptability, in which how well the learner can adapt the skill in varying conditions, we do a transfer test, which is done after the training period. For our program, we got the learner to perform 10 free throw attempts, but with opponents around the shooting line who are talking and trying to distract the learner, which is more like the game setting.
It is our 4-week training program, which shows the distribution of practice sessions, goals, and feedback for each week. In week 1, we will introduce the skill to our learner, whilst also completing the pre-intervention tests. The main exercises in week 1 is shooting straight up in the air with the dominant hand, with the goal of strengthening the arm and wrist. In week 2, the learner will work with a coach who will give demonstrations and feedback. The goals are to focus on fluency of the skill, and the learner will also be introduced to verbal cues such as cookie jar and bent knees. Week 3, we want the participant to perform free throws with correct technique whilst also moving further from the basket to improve shooting range. Lastly, in week 4, the learner will practice normal free throws and will also have to shoot with distractions. We want the learner to focus on accuracy. We have an experienced basketball player who is taking a free throw. This is a good example of the stationary, downward and upward phases together with a good wrist follow through. The exercise the learner will learn is to strengthen his arm and wrist whilst focusing on flicking of the wrist and creating backspin on the ball. The drill in week 2, the learner is watching a coach perform the skill, and this is beneficial because the beginner is able to perceive the strategy whilst being displayed correctly. We also have introduced the bending of knees and a full lower body extension to get a nice upward lift. Week 3's drill is to help the learner improve his range and also to make sure his technique stays correct while moving further away from the target, whilst making sure he's remembering those verbal cues. And finally, in week 4, we introduced distractions such as a defender to provide some variability in the training, but this also helps foster positive transfer to a game-like situation. Positive transfer is referring to any past experience a learner may have that could positively affect the learning of a new skill. For example, our participant has a history in European handball, where he learned how to pass and catch, which is heavily reliant on hand-eye coordination. This is helpful when learning basketball procedures because it requires similar skills. Communication will help learn the skill, but demonstration can help the learner to enhance the skill. Observational learning or modeling is said to be the most effective way of learning a new skill, especially at the cognitive stage. This is because the visual system is capable of automatically processing the observed movement in a way that constrains the motor control system to act accordingly. Furthermore, learners are able to perceive information about the strategies shown by the model to solve movement problems, therefore engaging the learner in more active problem solving. Verbal cues are an effective way to remind the learner to focus on specific aspects of the skill. They are concise statements or words that draw the attention of the learner to necessary information or elements. Cues also present benefits for memory as it stimulates past experiences from training. Examples of verbal cues for this skill include bend knees, which refers to the downward phase, and cookie jar, which refers to the wrist flick in the follow-through.
Augmented feedback is performance-related information added to or enhancing task-intrinsic feedback. The two main forms of augmented feedback are knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. In a free throw scenario, knowledge of results would be the player learning whether or not they scored, and if they didn't, how much they missed their shot by. Knowledge of performance, however, is the player learning what they did right and what they did wrong in the action of the skill. For example, if they didn't bend their knees enough while shooting. The distribution of practice sessions is a very important factor for the learning of the free throw skill. This is because the skill is discrete, a stop-start action with a clear beginning and end to the movement. We had our player practicing the skill 2 times a week in order to achieve major improvements. It was also performed as a mass practice rather than continuous sessions, as this has been found to bring about the best results by Lee and Genovese, 1989. Is a key predictor of success in future test situations, as the learner needs to experience variation, so that when it comes to actually performing the skill outside of training, they have already experienced what they are going to do. The benefits of variability include increased errors in the early stages of learning, increased capacity to perform in future situations, and more accuracy when transferring in the future. Laboratory research in motor learning has consistently demonstrated higher attention and of transfer when practice occurs under conditions of high contextual variety. Part practice is when a complex skill is broken down into distinct parts that are precisely separated, whereas whole practice is when the learner practices all parts of the skill in the right order from the outset. Free throw shooting is low in complexity and high in organisation. Therefore, it is suggested that the skill is performed in whole practice, as this will bring the most benefit to the performer. It is also a hard skill to break down into smaller sub-actions, making part practice a lot harder to complete.
Thank you for watching our 4-week training program on a basketball free throw. We hope you enjoyed it and as well as learned something new.